Log on, tune in, find out. Another good idea from Cambridge.
Welcome to the fourth Madingley Lecture. The Madingley Lectures are the University's Institute of Continuing Education's new public lecture series here at Madingley Hall. I'm Rebecca Lingwood, the Director of Continuing Education, and firstly I would like to take the opportunity to introduce our chair for this evening, Professor John Rallison, so that John can then introduce our speaker for tonight, Professor David Spiegelhalter, and then to chair questions at the end of the lecture. Professor John Rallison has been Pro Vice-Chancellor for Education at the University since October 2008. He's also a long-standing member of the Department of Applied Mathematics and Theoretical Physics, having been both a research student and a lecturer in the department. He is now Professor of Fluid Dynamics with a particular interest in the mechanics of elastic liquids. John is also a Fellow of Trinity College and has been since 1976, where he's been Director of Studies for both students in mathematics and in natural sciences. He's also been Senior Tutor at Trinity College for 2 periods, most recently in 2007 and 2008. So just before I hand over to Professor John Rallison to introduce our speaker, I'd just like to take this opportunity to ask you if you have brought your mobile phones to switch them off at this point. Thank you very much.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Madingley. Our speaker this evening is David Spiegelhalter, who's Whitton Professor of the Public Understanding of Risk in the university. And it's a particular pleasure for me to introduce him, in that we're both members of the same faculty. And here I have a confession to make. In my time, I've been to a vast number of mathematical lectures, some of them so scintillating in their technical competence and so abstract that I haven't understood a word. But tonight, that's not going to be the case. Because David has his feet firmly on the ground. He's Senior Scientist in the MRC Biostatistics Unit. He's an expert in areas of medical statistics, including important areas like clinical trials, health technology assessment, drug safety. And I see from the note you have in front of you that he led the statistical team in the Bristol Royal Infirmary inquiry and gave evidence to the Shipman inquiry. He works with schools and with other groups on introducing topics of risk and uncertainty into the curriculum. And he's a regular newspaper columnist, a media commentator on current risk issues, including public perceptions of flood risk, online disease alert systems, and again, I'm rather worried here, the possibility of a correlation between cycling and heart attacks. I'm feeling fine at the moment. His lecture this evening is Communicating Risk and Uncertainty. David.
Well, thank you all very much for coming out on a lovely evening such as this to watch a lecture indoors. You must be mental. Anyway, never mind. I'll try to make it entertaining. My anxiety, I always get nervous before talks, but I'm particularly nervous this time because with a local audience, people who may have seen me before, there's a certain pressure to have something new to say. So I have made a bit of an effort, and there's a lot of new stuff by ourselves and by other people in this talk. So that's why I get nervous, because I don't know how it's going to go down, but I hope it's going to be all right. Yeah, I'd like to give thanks to Mike Pearson, Ian White, and Ken Milne for some of the illustrations I'm going to be showing today. I'm going to be concentrating on visualizations, on images. I just love pictures, and And in fact, as you'll see from this little sheet of paper I've given out, we're going to be running a sort of beauty contest of images, and you're going to be the judge and jury on this. So I'm going to get you working later, judging some of the pictures I'm going to show you. Okay, so just to explain this funny title, Winton Professor of the Public Understanding of Risk. I'm endowed, sponsored by Winton Capital Management, which is a hedge fund run by David Harding, who's just given 20 million quid to the Cavendish for sustainable physics. And so we do all sorts of stuff. I do a lot of school stuff, about football, all sorts of things. We've got this website, Understanding Uncertainty. We've got a whole lot of articles on that. Other things I do, on YouTube, I'm Professor Risk. There's 2 of me taking my clothes off, which is a frightening thing, but it has had, had about 60,000 hits. So could you go on to it? Because I want to try to get up to sort of Shakira-type levels on my hit rate. I can't do that. And we're involved in all sorts of exciting things. One of the things which we'll come to later is some online risk quiz that you can all participate in that I'll give a plug for later. But the summary of my talk really is, why bother communicating risk and uncertainty? Why do we want to communicate this? What might be the problem of using numbers? Why do we have trouble with numbers? Do people have trouble with numbers? I'm going to give a great wodge of examples of uncertainty communication, stuff that we've been developing and other people, and I really would appreciate your opinions about this, whether you like it or not. At the end, I'm going to start getting into this difficult business of our uncertainty about uncertainties. If we have to acknowledge we don't really know what the numbers are, and we don't really understand what's going on, with that degree of honesty and humility, how can we still communicate that? And finish with a bit about risk perception. Now, it's clearly a huge area, and I can only just touch on this vast area of risk and how we perceive it and how we communicate it. And the point is that there's been a lot of work recently among psychologists showing how people react to risk, and this nice phrase, gut feelings, has come to be used, I think quite rightly, to describe how we as human beings respond to risk and how we've evolved to do so, how we've always done it and how we do it now. We do it without calculating. We do it without weighing things up carefully, without using numbers. And it's hardly surprising because the whole theory of probability, numerical theory of probability, only developed 300 years or so ago. It's very, very recent, and yet people have been obviously gambling for millennia and been taking decisions in the face of uncertainty since we came out of the trees. No, we didn't come out of the trees, really, did we? Anyway, since we evolved. So gut feelings about risk, many people now argue, and I would agree, work most of the time. But sometimes it's not going to work. As individuals, when we have to make important decisions, and of the kind that I'm going to be showing today, we really do perhaps have to start weighing up the pros and cons and putting magnitudes on these things. We can't just say, oh, just because something might happen, we should do something. What does that might mean? How big is it? And what are the consequences, both positive and negative, of acting? We can't just use our guts, our intuition all the time. And that's as individuals. But most important, perhaps of all, is the people, the great and the good, who are making decisions on our behalf about climate change, about swine flu, about protection against all these threats in our lives. I hope, desperately, we should hope, that they also are not just operating from absolute spontaneous intuition and gut feelings, that they are making an effort to work out, well, what would be the impact if we did this? And what would be the benefits and harms? That they are measuring things, putting numbers on stuff, on risks. So this is an important issue. Okay, representation. Now, I started off as a mathematician and became a statistician. I work with probabilities all the time. And probabilities, the usual way we get taught in schools, they're numbers between 0 and 1. Like 0.5, 0.25 means is a 1 in 4 chance. And my immediate, as soon as you start talking about them, you realize there's so many different ways of talking about them. We've learned we can use it as decimals, 0.25. Or, the chance of throwing 2 coins and them both coming up heads, for example. 0.25, or 1 in 4 chance. Or you could say 25% chance. You could say all sorts of things. You could say a 1 in 4 chance, quite, sort of standard, looking more like a betting language. 25 out of 100. 250 out of 1,000. Now, the mathematicians among you might say, well, they're all the same, they're all the same. They're not all the same. As I'll show in a minute, there's a huge difference between 25 out of 100 and 250 out of 1,000 in terms of the perception that it creates in people. These are all differences. 3 to 1 against, real betting language, horse racing type language, etc., etc. Now that's just in using numbers. When we come to pictures, as I'll show, there's a vast range of stuff we can do. We can do lines, bar charts, pie charts, icons. I'll show icon arrays, blocked and scattered. We can do, as I'll show, huge amounts of stuff, and then we can make them move as well. So these representations, these alternative representations, have been increasingly studied by psychologists to try to understand their impact upon people and how the representation influences different people's perceptions. Okay, so just as an example of this, risk communication using numbers. There's a paper recently, last year, Archives of Internal Medicine. Look, it's the medical literature is where people are studying this. How do people understand numbers? So, for example, in a population survey of 1,000 people, chosen at random, a telephone survey, they're asked which of the following numbers represents the biggest risk of getting a disease? 1 in 100, 1 in 1,000, 1 in 10. Now, I'm not going to ask you all, this is it's a bit late in the day to go through these sorts of things. So what you might want to think about is how many people get that wrong? How many people do you think get that wrong as a question? I mean, even guessing, you should, 33% should get it right. So how many people get it wrong? Well, it turns out that in Germany, about 28% of the population get that wrong. USA, about 25% of the population get that wrong. What's really exciting, I said I'd give it a plug later. We're currently carrying out on the BBC website the big risk test, which is the biggest risk psychology test ever done. We've got at least 70,000 people already participating who have answered questions like this. So we're going to have much bigger data on this than anyone else has ever had before, and by age and sex and all that kind of stuff. But we don't know what the answers are yet, unfortunately. So a lot of people don't understand that 1 in 10 is a big risk, is the biggest risk of getting the disease. It's the smallest number is the biggest risk. This is not good representation. Okay, what about the numerators and denominators? They matter. So this is an experiment that's been done in many populations. It's an old experiment, but it's been repeated many times. So you ask an audience of people, you give them 2 bowls, and it's a real gamble. And one bowl has got 9 white beans and 1 red bean. This bowl has got 92 white beans and 8 red beans. So that's 1 out of 10 red beans, 8 out of 100. You win a prize if you choose a red bean. Which bowl do you choose from? Do you pick from? Okay. How many people would pick the left-hand bowl? How many people would pick the right-hand bowl? Now, a few of you would. In the population, in a general population, around 50% of people will pick from the right-hand bowl. Mathematically, it's got a smaller chance of winning. Your chances are you're more likely to win from the left-hand bowl than the right-hand bowl. However, in the right-hand bowl, you've got more opportunities of winning. There's 8 opportunities. People look at the numerator rather than the denominator. It's called ratio bias. And this is why a probability of 250 out of 1,000 looks bigger to people than one of 25 out of 100. It's a very reproducible finding, ratio bias, which means you've got to be really careful about numerators and denominators. The crucial thing is you should always keep the denominator fixed and change the numerator. If you're going to say out of 1,000, everything has to be out of 1,000. You should not compare 1 out of 10 with 8 out of 100. It's really confusing. So numerators and denominators are important. And in fact, you get the real extreme is known as denominator neglect. Denominator neglect is when you don't look at the denominator at all. You only look at how often something's happened. And you think, well, who would do that? Well, every time you open the newspaper, you do that. Journalists suffer from denominator neglect. In fact, every narrative story only uses numerators. It only tells you about the time the terrorist bomb went off. It only tells you about the person who took this treatment and were cured. They do not tell you about how many people didn't get cured with this treatment. They do not tell you about how many times the bomb did not go off. They don't give you denominators, because that ruins the story. Ruins the story. Narratives only look at, and that's the extreme example. And this becomes one of the problems of combining gripping narrative with responsible statistics. And this is what I think is one of the most important things that one can deal with at the moment, is how to put these 2 things together. Stories, and yet something that also communicates magnitudes responsibly. And in fact, that's what we're going to be talking about today. Because framing, the language you use, the images you use, are enormously important. This is, I thought, a lovely bit of framing. 99% of young Londoners do not commit serious youth violence. There's a poster on the Underground. Now that's what's called a positive frame. Not 1 in 100 young Londoners do commit serious youth violence. Oh, that'd be terrible, you know, or so many thousand people, kids do commit violence every year, which focuses on the negative event. This is a positive frame, and it changes the whole perception. We do it all the time. We're seeing it all the time. What's interesting, you know, I won't show all the details, but for example, in the US, they always talk about mortality rates from heart surgery. In the UK, we report survival rates from heart surgery. Boom, you know, and you get a completely different image. In England, we're considered lucky to survive, I think, in the US. They look at how often you die. So framing is important. And as we choose the frame, in any communication exercise, we have to decide what we're trying to do. What are we trying to do when we communicate? Well, we are trying to attract attention. We want someone to look at our message. We want someone for it to grab their attention, and then we want them to understand it, for him to inform them. And those are the two things I'm interested in, and what I'm going to get you doing the beauty contest markings on. We may want to change behavior. Many of my colleagues, my public health colleagues, want to get people to stop smoking, exercise more, eat better, etc., etc. That's not actually my priority. If people want to smoke themselves, drink themselves in an early grave, that's up to them. I don't care. But they should, in fact, they should at least know what they're doing. So I'm interested in attracting attention and informing. But you'd think, well, this is all the same thing. We can get a nice picture or an image, and that'll inform people, and then they'll say, oh, yes, now I will give up smoking. It doesn't work like that. A nice review recently said that graphical features that improve accuracy of quantitative reasoning, in other words, help people's understanding, appear to be different from features that induce behavior change. And features that viewers like may not support either of the two goals. These are three completely different things. Something you like, you might not understand, and it won't tell you what to do. Something you don't like and don't understand could change your behavior. These are three different things, so we have to be really clear exactly what we're trying to do. So in a minute, I'm going to I've given you a little form, and I'm going to go through some pictures now, and this is just being useful to me. There's no prize. What I'd like you to do is to actually do a beauty contest of the pictures I show and grade them on terms of how attractive they are. It's a bit like, it is like a beauty contest. You've got attractiveness and understanding. So it's like, Miss World or something like that. So which dates me rather. The attract goes from 1. 1 is ghastly ugly. 5 is really beautiful. And for understanding, 1 is, I haven't got a clue what that's about. 5 is, wow, now I understand. Now it all becomes clear to me. So if you could do that, if you've got time to write any comments, that's great. So the first one, number 1, is this one. This is a very recent development from kickoff.co.uk, which is a sports betting site, and which presents, this is Stoke versus Arsenal for next Sunday. These are their predictions in terms of the odds on various outcomes. So Stoke, they think a 33% chance of winning, that's the home team, 29% chance of a draw, 38% chance of Arsenal, who are playing away, but are clearly the better team. And we actually get an exact score, 14% chance of a 1-1 draw, that's the most likely result. Next most likely is 12% chance of 0-1 to Arsenal, 11% chance of a 1-0 to Stoke. So really difficult call. It's all over the place. Very difficult predictions. Now, they're using a pie chart, breaking it up so the size of the wedge is proportional to the probability. It's got what's called a pie chart's got what's called part-to-whole comparison. We can see the probability of each and also see how it compares with everything that can happen. I shouldn't try to judge on this, but they do also put these inner wedges in. Now, these are ghastly because they make the length of the wedge proportional to the probability, which means that represents 14% and that represents 10%, which is appalling use of area, which the area now does not represent in any way the probability. Florence Nightingale knew how to do it 150 years ago, but they got it wrong. However, that's an example of a pie chart. Now, not all pie charts are quite so good. Here's a pie chart from Fox News, which represents the intention of people's voting behavior for presidential candidates. You may notice something quite odd about this pie chart. The numbers in the pie chart are supposed to add up to 100%. This is the worst pie chart that's ever been recorded. So there are good and bad. I'll show some other cracking awful ones in a moment as well. Now we're going to come on to bar charts. Now, these are popular. So this is Toronto's weather over the next day. This is, I did this an hour ago, I think. Got this off. They give likelihood of precipitation, probability of any rain in the next 3 hours, 6 hours. And it's funny, just as I left, my aunt from Toronto phoned up and she said, God, it's pouring down here. And I said, I know. And there's a 90% chance it's going to rain in the next 24 hours. So I knew it was raining in Toronto. So a horizontal bar chart. Why I'm interested in this is that I'm also working with the Met Office. On the Met Office are experimenting with communicating uncertainty about their weather forecasts. One of the interesting things is they realize that the last thing you should do for probability of precipitation is do a vertical bar marked blue, because then it looks like the amount of rain rather than the chance of rain. So it has to be horizontal and not blue. So that's what we're working on, that one. So I'm not going to get you to grade this one. This is another bar chart. I would like you to grade, because this is one that's being used, interestingly, on a relative of a colleague of mine went through this recently. This is for looking at the possible benefits of adjuvant chemotherapy. This is for a woman with colon cancer. And what it's representing then is, out of 100 people, if they don't have the additional therapy, in 5 years, about 78 will be alive, and about 12 will be dead due to the cancer, about 10 will be dead from other causes of the 60-year-old women like this with this type of cancer. If they do have the chemotherapy, then so many of these red ones will become yellow. In other words, they will become alive due to chemotherapy. Their lives will be saved over the next 5 years anyway due to chemotherapy. So almost half the reds disappear. However, what that also represents, it shows that out of 100 people, only 5 are going to benefit from the chemotherapy, at the cost of 100 having the side effects of chemotherapy. So that's what that's trying to visualize. It's not just showing the benefit, it's showing the benefit relative to everybody who's got to experience the treatment. Now that, in fact, so I quite like you to grade that one on whether you think it's attractive, whether it's comprehensible, because I'm giving you the explanation which may help. But this is meant to be done with, not by the patient on their own, but with conjunction with a doctor, which is important. Now, people have criticized those bar charts, and in fact written papers saying that using icon arrays, showing 100 people like you, is a more effective way to communicate to people, particularly people with low numeracy. That at decimal places, not a good thing for people with low numeracy. So this is the way, I just sent my spit into 23andMe, one of these US genome sequencing companies, paid my money, and I've got back my genome information, which told me that 31.3 out of 100 people like me who share my genotype will develop type 2 diabetes between the ages of 20 and 79. Of course, and compared with 25.7 out of 100. So they show 100 people, and then those, the coloured ones, are the ones who will get diabetes at some point in their lives between 20 and 79. The interesting thing is, of course, that I could have given this spit when I was a little baby. And so this is no information on what's happened between me being born and being 57 as I am. So I've actually got most of the way through here without it. So actually the chance of me developing it over the next period will be lower than that, because many of those would have developed already. So this is using icon arrays, what's called blocked icon arrays. You put 100 people like you and block them up. It allows the comparison quite nicely between the magnitudes. Now, you can also have scattered icon arrays. I don't know, some of you may have been through QRISK, which is the system used very, very widely in general practices for assessing your chance of a heart attack or stroke in the next 10 years. This is mine. According to its calculation, I've got an 11% chance of a heart attack or stroke in the next 10 years. And they represent the 11%. They're saying 100 people like me, and these are the 11 who will have a heart attack or stroke. And they scatter them around. Now, the scattering, people have done experiments. This is what psychologists do, is to compare, a blocked icon array with a scattered icon array. What's been found, I think is fairly intuitive, is that blocked icon arrays are better for making comparisons. Scattered icon arrays are much better for giving the impression of unpredictability about what will happen to you. It's just like throwing a dart. For me, if it hits the blue one, I'm going to have a heart attack or stroke in the next 10 years. So scattered icon arrays there. Now, you can have some terrible, I think it's one of the worst ones I've seen. This is the, Canadian driving test information that says how often people fail their tests for the first time. 16 in 40 men. And then they show 10 men with 4 blood. 12 in 40 women. There aren't 40 women there. I mean, it's just a complete mismatch between the numbers and the pictures. Absolutely disastrous. But not quite as bad as this. This was in the Daily Mail a couple of weeks ago. Alcohol cancer link. Cancer caused by drinking in Western Europe. 1 in 10 men. Do you think that means that 1 in 10 men will have cancer caused by alcohol? No, it doesn't mean that at all. Oh, sorry, yeah. It doesn't mean that at all. It doesn't mean, that's not what it means. I can't even remember what it does mean now. Can I remember? It means, oh, I know. Of people men who get cancer, 1 in 10 of them will have been caused by their alcohol, is the estimate. That's what it actually means. It's not 1 in 10 men. Not 1 in 10 men. You know, it's just a hopeless use. You know, icon arrays, changing denominators as well, very bad practice. Makes it very difficult to compare. Awful. Okay, let's look at other things. The Met Office at the moment are experimenting with uncertainty about weather forecasts. I did this about an hour ago as well. This is Cambridge. This is the predictions of the next 5 days for the maximum temperature reached in Cambridge. So 14, 16, 19, 22, this is the explanation. 22 is the most likely maximum temperature in Cambridge in next Saturday. Pretty good. But it's got this range of uncertainty. They reckon 9 out of 10 times it'll be in this range of uncertainty, between 15 and 25. So it's expressing uncertainty about the maximum temperature. Now, we're about to carry out this experiment with the Met Office where we're showing this and other representations of uncertainty about temperature to see which ones people understand and act appropriately on. This is on the current Met Office. If you look hard enough, it's on the current Met Office site. You can find this kind of information. Weather, and particularly disastrous weather, is a very common use of uncertainty forecasts like this. This is the cone of uncertainty, which I think is a great title. The cone. You can get T-shirts. I'm going to get one of these T-shirts with, you know, I've lived in the cone of uncertainty or something. It'd just be great. It's what they use in Florida for hurricane forecasting. And this is the representation they use. This is the most likely path of the hurricane. And the white bubble is one where there's a 2/3 chance of it lying in there compared with outside. So 2 to 1 that it'll be in the white rather than the green. The black is the most likely. The white is 2 to 1 chance. Now there's been papers written about this, about how people have been very misled by this representation. What people tend to do is fixate on the black line, and if they live off the black line, they say, oh, it's not going to hit me, and don't evacuate. Now, in fact, and whole towns have been flattened after people just sat there because the black line didn't go through the town. Not a bit of an exaggeration, but people have been really misled because of this fixation on the black line. And because there's no gradation in the white saying which areas are more likely than others, which are the sort of at-risk area, the black line or not. So the cone of uncertainty has been criticised quite a lot. I'd like to contrast it with what the Bank of England do, which are these fan charts. Now, Mervyn King has introduced these years ago and has really stuck to his guns in that when they make a projection, this is for growth, projecting growth in the future, 3 years in the future, they do not give a best line, the most likely line. They refuse to say what they think growth will be. They only give a distribution, a ranges and uncertainty. And where that's a 90% chance, an 80% chance, 70, 60, 50%. And they've stuck to that despite continual criticism by journalists who want to know, what do you think it'll be? And so, well, we don't know what it'll be. So they've stuck to that. Of course, as I've shown this, I can't resist. This is one of my old slides. I couldn't resist showing this before. This is what actually happened in 2000. Down here somewhere. But they're allowed that because there's a 10% chance they're going to be outside there. That isn't indicated in the fan. There's a 10%. Well, 1 in 10. Well, you win some, you lose some. So, and they definitely lost that one. Anyway, what's a bit sad is that the Office of Budget Responsibility now are producing their own fan charts, and they're putting in the central line, the central projection. They're backtracking on what Mervyn King has been trying to stick with, but still using the fan idea. Not such a finely good. I went to a whole meeting at the Bank of England where people are arguing about how many grade, how fine the fan should be and this sort of thing. How precise should this communication be? Okay, so fan charts. I'd like to really know what you think about those. Now, this is the Met Office for internal purposes and for some customers do have probabilistic forecasts. They can produce probabilities for anything that will happen. They sell them to people who want to insure, who really want to know the chances of severe weather events. So this is quite an interesting one. This was last year, looking at probability of wind gusts greater than 40 knots. So this is severe wind. And it's the thing here is not wind speed, it's the probability of getting this wind of this severity. So this is 90%. So this is very likely that the wind will be this severe in 3 hours' time. And the others are less likely. And I think, yeah, we can click through that. This is in 3 hour futures. And we get this animation of the probability of these high winds occurring up to 54 hours in the future. Now, the Met Office can produce this sort of stuff. They love doing it. Some people tell them people don't want this and can't understand it. But I would like to think that this could be made comprehensible to people. So that's they're using contours, as we're used to contours, but the contours represent the risk, the probability of these particular severe events. Okay, what else have I got? Oh, risk ladder. Risk ladder, these are very popular. These work on a sort of log scale, because there's always a problem with comparing small risks, big risks with small risks. So, a 1 in 100 risk with a 1 in 100 million risk, which is generally considered completely negligible. So 1 in 10 million risk down here, what they're comparing here are things where you might understand about your everyday risk, death in road traffic crash in 1 year, 1 in 10,000 there, compared with, this was actually prepared by anaesthetists to try to communicate anaesthetic risks to their patients. So there's about 1 in 10,000, 1 in 100,000 chance of deaths from anaesthesia, 20 years ago, and that's generally recorded. Still, emergency surgery is about 1 in 100,000, 1 in 200,000 for routine surgery. The death from anaesthesia alone, not from the operation. So there they can compare these different anaesthetic awareness. 1 in 10,000 people will know what's going on in their operation in spite of the anaesthetic. Whoa. Well, it's only as big as the chance of being killed in a crash. Anyway, so it allows you to make those comparisons. These risk ladders are popular. I don't know what you think about these. They've sort of gone a bit out of fashion, but they were popular for a while. This is word clouds. This is using some of the more modern things. People have seen word clouds used on websites to indicate how frequently words are used. An alternative, these are for a 50-year-old female smoker and a 50-year-old female who's never smoked, the chances of dying from these various causes over the next 10 years. So you're seeing there where the size of the font is proportional to the risk. We have no idea what the actual numbers are. We're just getting, this is just good for get an impression of magnitudes. So we not only see, the point about this is we should not only see the difference of the lungs, but also the increase in the stroke risk, the heart attack risk, and so on, the COPD risk. It's not just lung cancer that female smokers are being affected by in any way at all. Whereas, the chance of dying of something else is very similar, accidents is about the same, et cetera, et cetera. And we can see that visually very quickly, quite a complex message being communicated. Okay, don't know what you think about that. An interlude, just to try something else, I'm trying out new stuff on you because I wanted to try. Some of you may have heard me talk about this idea of a micromort. A micromort is a 1 in a million chance of dying. Quite a useful measure because we can use it to compare various things like having an anaesthetic, an emergency anaesthetic, 1 in 100,000 chance of dying, that's 10 micromorts. That's about the same as riding 60 miles on a motorbike, driving 2,500 miles in a car routinely, et cetera, et cetera. We can make these comparisons. Now, one of the points about those comparisons is that they're concerned with what you might call acute risks. Things are going to kill you straight away. You're just going to be, okay, and then dead. But that's not what many risks are about. Many risks are chronic risks, things that are going to affect our life. The smoking, eating, exercise, radiation, are things that are not going to kill us straight away. They're going to have a long-term effect. And why I got interested in this was because of this business, the whole Fukushima and tsunami stuff, and I was writing articles for BBC Asia Pacific, which got a lot of coverage, and it was very interesting in this whole discussion about in Japan, about the reporting of radiation, and it's clear that radiation was being reported by many people as if, oh, it's radiation, arg, and the idea of magnitude and scale wasn't being communicated adequately at all. And some people were saying, hang on, there's background radiation, more radiation when you take a flight to Tokyo than there is living there, and this sort of thing. So they're going to be exposed to more radiation when they leave Tokyo than they are when they're living there, and that sort of thing. So, but that's quite difficult to communicate. One of the things I found quite a good image, this is taken from US National Academy of Sciences report, to try to get some perspective on the voluntary radiation that we're prepared to endure, is a nice picture they've done here, which is to compare, and this is one of these shocking comparisons, a bit like David Nutt comparing taking ecstasy with horse riding. This is comparing having an X-ray with being in Hiroshima. And this is comparing the distance from the epicenter of the Hiroshima bomb, what people were, the radiation exposed to there, compared with what you're exposed to when you have a CT scan. And having a CT scan is equivalent to being about 1.5 miles from the Hiroshima explosion. Having a chest X-ray is about 2 miles. So that's the same amount of radiation as if you're 2 miles from the center of Hiroshima explosion, just going in and having an X-ray. So these are exposures. Now these are fairly low exposures, and of course, you get closer and closer, and these are higher. These get higher and higher. And the problem is, again, it's a bit like these risk scale. Like you're talking about 1,000s, 10,000s. It's all in orders of magnitude. It's very difficult things to communicate. And another rather shocking thing I found that the National Cancer Institute in the US, there were 75 million CT scans carried out in the US in 2007. And they estimated that will cause 29,000 cancers in the future from voluntary CT scans being carried out for therapeutic purposes in the US. You can buy one. I went on the web. It's about 800 quid if you want to, if you want to get a CT scan, just to, to check the whole person check. You'd be absolutely mental to do it. But never mind. That's what people are, willing to pay. So this is, how can we compare these but these are chronic risks. These are not going to damage you straight away. People have got, and also what it shows, of course, people have got a very different attitude to voluntary risks to ones that are imposed upon them. So one way to think about chronic risk is to think of perhaps how much life we've got left. Now, I've chosen a young person, a 26-year-old woman at the moment, assuming actually nothing changed. Of course, actually things are going to improve. Life expectancy will improve during her lifetime. But at the moment, if nothing changed, she would have 57 years life expectancy left. That's 1.5 million hours. So roughly speaking, for a young person, has got 1.5 million hours to live in their adult life. So 1.5 million hours. So you can think of a micro-life be a reduction of your life expectancy by 30 minutes. Now, it doesn't mean you've exactly lopped 30 minutes off your life in any way at all. It's just because you don't know what will happen. But on average, if you expose yourself to a micro-life, you've reduced your life expectancy by 30 minutes. And you can do the calculations. It's roughly about two fags, about 3 pints of beer. Cigarettes, about 15 minutes off your life expectancy on average. So we can start comparing these things. And I haven't done it yet, but you could do it for an inch around your waist every year. Being overweight will be knocking off micro-lives systematically. So you can compare these things. And actually, the latest research done has shown about a sievert of radiation exposure loses you on average 1 year of life through cancer. For some people it might not have any effect at all, for others a lot more, but on average 1 year of life lost. So a CT scan of 10 millisieverts, that's 100th of a sievert, is around 4 days, or 180 microlives, around 360 cigarettes. So having a CT scan is like a chest X-ray, about 0.3 millisieverts, about 3 microlives, an hour and a half, about 6 cigarettes. So that's what you're exposing yourself to. Now, you can see now why, actually, if you need a chest X-ray or a CT scan because you've damaged yourself, it's going to be helpful. Yeah, of course you're willing to expose yourself to that. You can also see why people who work there day after day don't want to expose themselves to this and why they cover up so carefully, because this creates an enormous cumulative exposure of risk. So we now can get an idea of how we can compare both these acute risks and chronic risks. And I think this, I'd like to hear your opinions later maybe, of whether one could use this more widely. Okay, so we're in the home straight now. What if probabilities are uncertain? So this is one I've done. This is my risk of colorectal cancer for the rest of my life. I did this myself. This is from the National Cancer Institute in the US. This uses quite a lot of the tricks that people have been suggesting. is using the whole bar of 0 to 100, so you get the part-to-whole comparison. But it's using a magnifying glass just to blow up the one area. It's saying my lifetime risk of colorectal cancer is about 7%, and it's showing uncertainty about that 7% as a blurring, doing a sort of fan chart blurring of my 7%. And it says my risk of developing colorectal cancer during my lifetime is about in the range 6 to 8%, somewhere between 6 and 8 out of every 100 people. So it's doing the expressions of frequency, and it's higher than average, and maybe higher or lower. So they're expressing considerable uncertainty about what the risk is. Now, there's been research on whether this is a good or a bad thing to do. It turns out that people, and I think again fairly intuitively, with reasonable numeracy and good education actually quite appreciate having this uncertainty being expressed to them. It increases their trust in the source. It says, yeah, I'm not quite too sure, but it's around about this. For people who are finding this all a bit of a struggle to start with, this extra uncertainty leads to a decrease in their trust and a bafflement. So this provision of uncertainty about the risks is something that's got to be treated quite carefully, in fact. Now, I'd like to just show some of our work we've been doing, hugely influenced by these wonderful stuff, the isotypes of Otto Neurath and Gert Ernst. Now, they were working sort of peripherally with the Bauhaus movement in the 1920s and 30s. Gert Ernst was in Germany and went to Vienna to work with Otto Neurath in the sort of Red Vienna movement, where they were absolutely committed to informing the masses about the state of the economy, the state of the culture. They had to leave Vienna then in 1934 and went to Holland, and then Otto Neurath came to Britain. And they developed, these are quite familiar because they found their way into a lot of children's books and children's things, especially in the UK. They used icons stacked up as bars. So it's a mixture of icon arrays and bar charts. I think it's really nice. So this is people showing what women are working in 1930. Each one represents 5% of the population of women. So there's 100 all to there each way, and they get moved across depending on how many are working and what they're working in. Agriculture, industry, the red, commerce, the blue, etc. And this is the number of cars being built, with the dividing line being in the US compared with the rest of the world, 1914. I think these are beautiful, absolutely lovely. So we've been sort of copying some of these, Mike Pearson has been working on this, to try to illustrate some really quite complex information. The Cochrane collaboration produce reviews of evidence to tell you what the benefits of treatments might be, and the benefits and harms of treatments. So this is adjuvant radiotherapy after surgery for cervical cancer. And sorry about all the gloomy examples. This rather complex table tells you about what, out of 1,000 people being treated, how many would benefit and how many might harm due to side effects of this treatment. Now, how we've represented that is to say that here's 100 people, 100 women. These are all they've all had surgery for cervical cancer. These have had radiotherapy, and those have not had radiotherapy. What we would like to look at is over 5 years, out of these women, how many will be dead within 5 years? How many will have disease progression within 5 years? How many will have hematological adverse event? How many will have genitourinary adverse events? And what we can do is show that from the Cochrane data that it looks like the 16 will be dead compared with 13 who have the therapy, more with disease progression there, but more people, if you have the radiotherapy, more side effects, which you expect out of the 100. But we're seeing more on that side, more or less on that side, and we're also seeing magnitude out of the whole 100. Now, the 100 start getting in the way, so one might want to just do that just to give an image that this is actually still quite rare, even though it's more common with the treatment than not the treatment. And then we might want to look at, well, does one balance out the other? What's the risk balance? And we could get at that by subtracting the smaller from the larger one. And we find out that we'd estimate, the Cochrane data would estimate that out of these 100 people, if you don't have the treatment, there'll be 3 extra deaths, 9 extra disease progressions. But if you do have the treatment, the cost is you'll have 2 extra of those adverse events, 1.5 extra of these. So the crucial thing is there is a risk balance. That's why we've called it the risk balance. Is that benefit worth this cost? And it depends how much you weigh these, how much they weigh accordingly. Now, we've done these for a number of applications, and the most interesting ones, which we're still working on, would be hormone replacement therapy, for example, where the cost, the benefits might be a reduction in the risk of various cancers, various diseases, and but the benefits, of course, might be the symptom relief that you get. So it's definitely risk balance. The final thing we've introduced, which I do believe really should be optional, is to say that we're uncertain about how big these numbers are. The Cochrane collaboration is quite clear. We don't know how big these numbers are. And we can blur them. We can take the blurring idea and say, well, it's around 2, around 1.5, around 9, fairly confident that's around 9. The death is really uncertain. Actually, the death data you could pretty well ignore. It's really uncertain whether there's going to be benefits or harms. You can see it could be either way. So in fact, the death data could be pretty well ignored, but the other things are important. So that I think it should definitely be an optional extra. Okay, just my final few, final few minutes. I'm going to go through this very quickly because I just wanted to then talk about the more difficult problem of when we don't know what we're doing anyway, when the arguments about the science. I won't go into this in detail. This is just, on these, I put this 3 yellow out of 4 indicates that that's based on pretty good evidence, moderate quality evidence, based on this grade scale, which says that actually further research is unlikely. It may affect our confidence and may change the estimate, but it's unlikely to change actually the sign, the direction of our estimate. Now, the people who are really struggling with communicating uncertainty in the face of deep uncertainty, when you have to acknowledge you don't fully understand what's going on, is climate science, who have got into a lot of problems with the way they've communicated uncertainty in the past in the IPCC in their reports. The AR4 used this as a picture which showed under different emission scenarios what the likely global surface warming might be, with huge uncertainty around these uncertainty bands around what the impact might be. And but different groups, working groups, use different methods, and there was a lot of criticism about what they were doing. What's interesting, this has just come out. This is for the IPCC 5th assessment report that's due, that will be the next one on what might happen in the future, trying to get consistent treatment of uncertainties. And I'd just like to go through this briefly because I think it does provide a lesson for when we're dealing with deep uncertainties, because these people have struggled away with this for years and years. What they've concluded is that you can't just talk in terms of probabilities. You have to have an extra measure of your confidence in your whole analysis. You've got to have your level of confidence in your conclusions, whether they're very low, low, medium, high, very high. So you have to, and you base that on how much evidence there is and how much people agree about it. So if you've got high agreement and robust evidence, you've got high confidence. Low agreement, there's almost no evidence and nobody can agree what's going on anyway. That's very low confidence. So that's quite nice. And they say you should only in this area should you be willing to assign probabilities to things. Otherwise, you should just say, well, we don't know what the numbers are. And if you do probabilities, you do them in bands like that and give them names so that you communicate. Very likely means between 90 and 100% probability of something happening. And then they say that when you report, you must only report to the level of precision that's justifiable by the information you've got. So that sometimes you can only give a range for a variable. This is just one thing. You can't give it an estimate, you can't give it you could just say, well, I think it's between here and here. That's, the temperature change might just, I think it's probably between here and here. Based either on analysis or even expert judgment. And you might not even be able to put a probability on that. You might only just be able to give some confidence. I've got medium confidence in this statement. So I think this is a really brave effort. Whether it'll work, we'll see, to try to communicate uncertainty when there's a possibility of really deep disagreement about what's going on. Okay, so to conclude, what I've ignored so far is sort of people's response to all this. And the crucial thing, all the research shows that people's responses to threats and risks and their own health and their futures are dominated by their gut feelings, their emotion, their personality, their own experience and people around them, the feelings of control. Their cultural beliefs, how they feel that society should be organised and whether it should be shared decision-making, whether it should be organised in a very hierarchical way. Their trust of authority, what sort of hazard it is. You could see radiation. Ticks all the boxes for fear and dread there. Innocence of victims, what other people are feeling. And in all of this, probabilities, all this stuff I've been talking about, is largely ignored. They almost taken no notice of at all. And I'd say, most of the time that's fine, but I suppose what I'd argue is that there's situations of the kind I've been describing, whether it's betting on next week's football match, which you should not do using gut feelings, you should be doing using very careful analysis, or deciding about chemotherapies, or deciding about climate change, where you should go beyond gut feelings. You really should be trying to measure this stuff. So in conclusion, we could try to use our brain, use our capacity for analysis and abstract thought and numerical quantification, rational weighing things up. Or we could go with our guts. It's some guts. And we can just use our feelings, our intuition, our culture and emotion. And I'm not saying this is wrong. It's not right or wrong. These are complementary. They're always part of the business. And so I suppose what I'm moving towards is the idea of a synthesis, a heart maybe, where you acknowledge in using your brain that your guts are also important. I suppose and so what I'm really interested in now is producing ways of communicating uncertainty and risk, communicating these numbers, but in a way that grabs people and helps to inform them by engaging their emotions to some extent. You've got to be careful with the images, not to engage their emotions too much, but by trying to do that. Okay, I'll stop there. Thank you very much indeed. Oh, good. I'm going to collect these in afterwards, and I won't be marking you.
Yep. I'm just going to restrict myself to one comment,
yeah,
which is the comparison of distance from the Hiroshima epicenter,
yeah,
with medical X-ray exposures.
Yeah.
The problem with that is that what you're really doing is demonstrating the risk ratios of two things which most people have never encountered.
Yeah, yeah.
Therefore, it doesn't actually mean anything to anybody.
Yeah.
What we're trying to do is to convince people whether or not to have a medical X-ray.
Yeah. No, that image is clearly, I think, of the ecstasy type comparison. It's something that's mainly is an attention-grabbing device, I think, largely. It doesn't really help you to decide whether to have an X-ray or not, to know that it's equivalent to standing 2 miles from Hiroshima. Although it does it engages the emotions, because it does shock people, and it does illustrate the fact that there is a risk attached to these things. Now, it's a risk that you are voluntarily engaging in this nice, beneficial environment. However, it's still as big a risk as if someone was doing it to you, which you did, and you hadn't chosen it. Yeah.
What I found particularly interesting about that one, radiation actually happens to be my business.
Oh, right, yeah.
I've also had a background in civil defense.
Right.
What it does demonstrate is that if radiation really wasn't the major problem in Hiroshima.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you, David, for absolutely fascinating lecture. Can I suggest to you, you need both? And many of the illustrations you've been giving us are graphs or facts.
Yeah.
Now, where I'm coming from is a little while ago, I ended up producing a leaflet for parents of premature babies and the risk of problems that the babies might have. And when we produced this, we tried it out on the parents. And really what came back in general terms, the men said, give us some graphs, give us some numbers.
Yeah.
And the women said, for goodness sake, don't give us graphs, write it down in words.
Yeah.
So a lot of these things you've been showing is, here's a graph, do we understand it? Here's a chart.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes these things you've really got to give both ways for people to understand it when they're coming from different backgrounds and all this.
Thanks for the plug. I really should have said that. I should have had a prompt for myself. So thanks for I didn't plant the question, but it's exactly what I wanted to hear. We just written a paper on this, and our main conclusion, as many other people said, so you must have multiple representations. There's not one size fits all. There's enormous range in people's willingness, Oh, God. Can people please turn off their phones, really? For heaven's sake. I told you not to call me in the office. Dear me, how embarrassing. Yeah, it must have multiple representations. Because what's always struck me is that people are very willing to have leaflets in different languages, but why don't they have leaflets for people with different levels of numeracy, who want different depths of information? And so the people we're working now with a number of agencies. The nice thing about doing these things online, as most of the stuff now is being developed, is that it really allows you to do this multiple levels. You can have an upfront, very simple image, bam, image. And then if you want to know more, you can find out more. And you can even get down to the uncertainty about the risks. Now, I think to get down to that, the blurred risks, you really need to be, really have to push for it. You shouldn't be offered that straight away unless you really want to know. And it allows you to tailor to people's demands and choices. So that's much more difficult in print versions, but I think you need multiple print versions. But for web-based stuff, where increasingly patient information stuff is getting web-based, it allows a wonderful opportunity for both animations, movement, but in particular, allowing the message to be tailored to the needs and demands of the audience. There's not one size fits all at all.
Thank you. Can you comment, you at an early stage in the presentation, you distinguished between communicating to policymakers about whole populations and communicating to individuals about how they might act. Can you comment on the kind of uncertainty principles that come in when you try and deduce what an individual person might do, for example, about health or in relation to other risks, compared with communicating to policymakers about what's sensible for a whole population?
Exactly. No, I mean, that's a whole other talk, which I happen to have here, but I won't do now. No, that is the crucial thing. The one example I often give of that is things like, is trying to get people to change their diet. And, the bacon sandwich story I usually give, where in terms of a population, it would make a huge difference if everyone cut down how much processed meat they ate, just a bit, and their red meat as well. It would make a sizable difference in the number of people who develop bowel cancer, etc., etc. However, the effect on each individual is completely unmeasurable and very small. The chance of them benefiting or being harmed by this is very small indeed. And they certainly will never know whether it's had any effect on them whatsoever. And so it's this classic example, what's known as the prevention paradox that Jeffrey Rose explored, is that a benefit that could be an intervention that could, on everybody, that could have a large benefit for the whole population, is likely to have absolutely negligible, at each individual, it has an absolutely negligible level. And of course, what this carries on to is, in terms of public health interventions, is the argument there is that public health interventions should be carried out at a societal level, rather than going around person to person, wagging a finger and saying, oh dear, you're ruining your life and that sort of thing. Medicalizing people and blaming them for their actions, rather than saying, no, actually, they get the greatest benefit if we just change the whole context in which we're living. So it's that argument is a really relevant political argument at the moment.
Take you back to the cervical cancer example, where you showed the difference in really morbidity and mortality, and said that because of the uncertainty around the deaths data, the deaths don't matter. Yeah. However, they would probably have needed to study 9 times more patients in order to reduce the uncertainty around the deaths. And if I really knew that the 3 was for real,
you could make,
then that might make a huge difference to my decision. So it's bad science that one cannot necessarily dismiss the uncertainty. No, what you need to do is more work to reduce the uncertainty.
Exactly, because, and in fact, from a decision theoretic point of view, the uncertainty is irrelevant. If 3 is the best estimate, that goes into the balance. And this uncertainty actually is not relevant to the decision from a strict decision theory point of view. So, I don't know, I mean, it's this problem once you start blurring them. It's all right if you blur and all the blurs still stay on one side, but once they start crossing over, you actually have to say, well, I'm not sure, this could be beneficial or harmful, we're not sure. On balance, it's probably harmful. beneficial to have the treatment. Yeah. I think that's a very important point, because I just don't know quite how one would word the conclusion. Because one of the things I haven't showed here, the advice is that in these things, you also provide guidance as to the interpretation. Great big speech bubbles with arrows pointing at the message. You can't assume that people are going to take the message. It's all right if you're sitting around with an expert and the pictures and the patient, but you can't assume that's going to be the case. So if you're going to give these to patients to take home, which is what I believe you should do, or get them and their family to do them online at home, you need to provide interpretation as well. Big arrows saying, this is what this means, this is what this means. Shove it on top.
You touched earlier on in your talk about inverting the problem and presenting what is not likely to happen rather than what is.
Yeah.
Have any comparative studies been done as to which, in fact, is more acceptable to the public, which they take on board?
Endless studies have been done showing that the way in which you word it influences people's perceptions and their behaviour. You can change by moving from a positive or negative to a negative frame. You can influence someone's perceptions and make people change their decisions, actually, just purely by the language that you use. So there's endless experiments being done like that. And the conclusion people draw is that you should always try to use a positive and a negative frame. It's quite difficult because, like in the cervical cancer ones, when I show, this many people get side effects, 97 out of 100 will not get side effects, and those are equally important. The positive frame would say 97% don't get side effects. The negative frame is to focus on the 3% that do. It's very tempting always to start focusing on the negative frame. And yet, that's why we've kept those blocks there, to try to keep track that we're talking about events that are rare in either case. Most likely, things will just be okay. It's very difficult because you know that the framing affects it. There's no way to do it, completely objectively. And the message is that if you're going to be, the ethical duty is to present both positive and negative frames. But difficult to do.
You briefly mentioned the aspect of the way stories are represented in the media.
Yeah.
And in terms of public understanding and perception, it's the media that has a much greater influence on Joe Public. How hard is it to get the ideas that you've been telling us into the skulls of those nice journalists and broadcasters?
Yeah, no, it's interesting because we are working on that. Doing increasingly work. In fact, it's the not just the broadcasters and journalists, it's the press officers. It's particularly important as press releases because, frankly, large amount of journalism is rewriting press releases, or not even rewriting them very much. And so it's press. So we've been working with the STEMPRA, who are the Scientific Press Officers Organisation. There's been doing courses for journalists with Sheila. We've been journalistic training. They're setting up in the BBC. We've got the College of Journalism. The BBC has got a series of stuff coming up that I could be working on. So there is a lot of interest in this. One of the problems is that science journalists on the whole are very good. But once the story gets big enough, it moves out of the science and the health journalists into the ordinary news journalists. And they've got a completely different approach. And frankly, are pretty hopeless. And so, and they're not going to come on these courses either, I'm sure. That's the trouble. So it is difficult when a story gets big enough to get on the front pages. It suddenly all goes to pot.
On which note? David, I think it's already been said for me, it's fascinating, intriguing, important lecture. Thank you very much for your contribution. Seems to me that someone who professes public understanding and the Institute of Continuing Education are peas in a pod. So thank you very much for your contribution this evening.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
So thank you, John, for chairing this evening, but also thank you, of course, to Professor David Spiegelhalter for a hugely stimulating Mattingly lecture this evening. And as a small token of our appreciation, we have a gift for you,
thank you.
Which provides a guide to the hall and the gardens, so you can come back and appreciate our history.
Do I get a free? Do I get a free wedding?
Negotiation, yes, yes. It goes without saying, of course, that events such as this evening don't happen by themselves. So I would like also to thank my colleagues, without whom none of us would be here this evening. So thank you. I'd also like to say that I hope that I will see many of you back here at the Institute of Continuing Education at Mattingly Hall, not only for future Mattingly lectures, but also for Mattingly concerts. We have our third Mattingly concert next Sunday afternoon. Details of both the lectures and the concerts are given on our website, and you can find details of our website address in your programme. So please do take your programme away with you. It also gives details of courses that we are running that are related to this evening's lecture. Of course, our website and the brochures that are available outside on the gallery give details of everything that we do. And I hope that some of our courses will catch your attention, because there's an awful lot there to catch your attention. We have between 8,000 and 10,000 student enrolments each year, and we're offering courses, short courses, for, not for credit, right the way through to part-time master's degrees in subjects for personal, intellectual enrichment, and also for professional development and diversification. And of course, we also run the international summer schools that bring well over 1,000 people to Cambridge each year. So we're very busy, and I would hope that you can join us for some of our future activities. You'd be more than welcome. So thank you again. The bar is open if you'd like to stay and have a drink, or catch the last of the sunlight and have a look around our splendid gardens. Make yourselves feel at home. So thank you.